Hello everybody, welcome to the Chrono Chronicles and Back to School episode 6. I'm your host David, and in this episode we are going to look at a situation that doesn't happen very often, but when it does it leaves players scratching their head and consulting the rulebook. And it's happened on the channel loads of times, so I thought it'd be really good to kind of just address this one and have a look at it. And whilst we're there as well, we're going to look at etiquette surrounding tape measures. I think it's a really good one, so we'll have a look at that as well. All right, now before we get started, I just want to say many thanks to Dan Porter for lending me his word bearers and Imperial Fists. So without those, I don't know where we'd be with content, particularly as we obviously can't film battle reports at the moment. So Dan, thank you very much. Let's look at the scene we've got here. We've got a word bearers assault unit charging an Imperial Fist tactical unit. And the word bearers unfortunately have found themselves in a bit of an extended line, but they're keen to get into combat. And they're just going to try and charge the Imperial Fists as best as they can. So the distance between the charging units is it's just over 8, so it's about 8¼ inches. So that obviously goes to a 9, so we're a 9-inch charge. So let's just assume that the charge was declared, Overwatch was fired, no casualties, and the word bearers have rolled that 9-inch charge. So 9 inches would take us directly into combat, closest unit to closest unit, or model to model. Now, what I have seen many times, both watching games at clubs or tournaments or Warhammer World, whatever, is if there is a really assaulty army and they're trying to get into combat, that 9-inch charge can sometimes be a 10-inch charge. You just have a little bit of a bendy tape measure just to get that unit right into the guts of the opposing models. And you know, if you're an assaulty army or you've got an assaulty unit, you really want them to make combat. And you know, it's great that they made combat, but if they fail or they don't quite get as deep into the enemy units as possible, then that can be a little bit tricky. And it's hard for your opponent to then go, well, hang on a minute, I'm sure they would have made it, but would that model have really got as deep in? And sometimes it generally is a Praetor, perhaps leading from the front maybe, and you really want to get all of those attacks into combat. So just be aware of that. You know, assaulty units tend to have an elasticated tape measure, so just keep an eye on that. But also, players will want to get their unit as deep in as possible to maximise their attack. So you just have to be quite careful. But then if you say, well, hang on a minute, that was a 10-inch charge, not a 9-inch charge, or you think, oh, that's gone a bit too far, or you should have gone closest, you then feel a bit of a prick for pointing that out to your opponent. But really, it's not your fault. You know, if you feel like you're being a little bit hard done by, then you need to say something. You know, don't let players get away with it, because sometimes if you're at a club and you're having a friendly game, you just, it's only an inch short, yeah, but get him in, we'll have a combat, you know, and sometimes that spirit of the game doesn't quite translate over to a tournament where everyone's trying to, I'm not saying everyone's trying to win, but everyone's trying to have a good competitive game. So just bear that in mind. Some of you may have been guilty of it before, but you know, it's a little bit tough, eh? So let's just assume that we made it in and we go closest to closest, which we've done there. And now the rest of the word bearers will follow up with their charge. So I'm just going to move those models quickly. Okay, so that's a charge done. So now we'll go into initiative steps. We've got initiative 4 for the Marines and initiative 1 for the Sergeant on both sides. So what we'll do now is we'll move the word bearers, seeing as it is their turn. Move them first. Won't move the Sergeant, of course. He's initiative 1. He's probably not going to get to strike because of where he is. That can also be the downfall as well. You know, sometimes people hide their sergeants or special characters towards the back of the squad, and then if you charge over an extended line, that sergeant with his power fist or his Praetor, the Paragon Blade or whatever, power axe, doesn't make it into combat, and that's really, really tough. But, you know, you never know where the firepower from the enemy is going to come, whether it's going to come from the side or it's going to come from the front. I mean, generally you can tell, but sometimes a unit might outflank or deep strike, and so protecting that sergeant in the unit is quite key. I'm sure you all know how to play Heresy. I'm not trying to tell you how to play Heresy. You're all pretty much veterans, I would imagine. Maybe some new people to the game, which is good. We need new people in the game. All right, we're at initiative 4. Those that can consolidate, have piled in, have done so. And let's have a look. That is just out. So unfortunately, I'm just going to face him that way so I don't get confused. So in this instance, only 3 of those word bearers can attack the Imperial Fist. So we'll call that 6 attacks. And that will probably kill 2, maybe 3 Marines. But let's say for this instance, it kills 2 Imperial Fists. That's fine. Now we'll go to Initiative 4 of the Imperial Fists. Now everybody is within 2 inches of someone in base contact, apart from this Marine here. So what we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, maybe that will kill 2 word bearers. Now we'll go to Initiative 1. The Sergeant steps up. He goes 3 inches, which actually puts him in contact with this Imperial Fist. With this word bearer. And the word bearer Sergeant moves forwards 2 inches. And now he is within 2 inches of someone in base contact, which is great, great news. Now, for argument's sake, let's just assume that the Imperial Fists, for whatever reason, do a much better job than the word bearers and manage to wipe out 4 Marines, including the Sergeant. So let's do that. Great. And then the Power Fist double KOs the Imperial Fist as well, and another Marine. So it was a bit of a bloodfest. Happens. And now, so the Imperial Fists have won the combat by a difference of 2, 4, 6, 2, 4, by a difference of 2. But true believers on the word bearers, they've passed, and now everyone makes a pile in. So let's just do that. Now, what we can find is at the end of that pile-in, I've just slightly short moved those just to kind of get my point across, because, you know, without getting a protractor out and measuring everything, it will be quite difficult. So what we can find now, sometimes we find that when the units pile in after making that a combat, no one is in base contact with each other. And then at this point, everyone looks at each other and goes, wow, what the hell just happened there? You know, that unit should have wiped the unit out. They bounced, unfortunately. And now at the end of the combat, we've ended up with no one in base contact. And this is where everyone goes to the rule books and everyone looks down and, what, is that right? Is that right? But yes, it is right. So what happens here is that is the combat. The combat is over. And now both units consolidate because no one is left at the end of the combat after that pile-in within base contact with each other. And it only needs to be one model, and that's fine. And then everyone can come in. But in this instance, it doesn't happen, and now you roll your dice, you consolidate. And if you're an Imperial Fist player, that is fantastic. Obviously, if you're a word bearer player, that's not cool either. So now, word bearer's a good decision. Do they go forward, pursue, or do they try and go back? It doesn't really matter. Those bolters are in range. So, as I said, it doesn't happen that often, but generally, as I mentioned before, it's models on an extended line charging into a tightly formed group of models. But then, your other argument, you could say to me, well, actually, if I was that player, I wouldn't charge. You're right. But what it might do, there's always that chance that your saving throws will go through and they'll help you out and you won't lose the combat, and you will take that unit off an objective, or you will tie them up, or you will deny it from the next turn. And, these all help, because we know from games on the channel and games in general that you have to play to the mission, and denying units scoring points or victory conditions, it really, really helps. The next point I wanted to talk about was the tape measure. I covered it very briefly there, and I don't want to preach too long about this because this is not what I want my platform for. But tape measuring is really, really important. Now, some people tape measure differently, or measure differently rather. Some people go from the center of the model. Some people go right from the front of the base. Or if you're in a vehicle, which I have conveniently under here, yoink. Vehicles are a real tricky one. And the worst crime committed, I think, and I've done it myself a few times. I'm not perfect by a very long stretch. But sometimes I'll go from the front and I'll go, all right, I've got 6-inch move, yeah, and then I'm gonna rotate, and then I'm gonna go another 6 inches. It's really tricky. Or sometimes I'll go from the turret, but then you forget and think, oh, did I go from there? And then you go, oh, I can't quite remember. I'll tell you what, I'll put it back and then I'll go from there again. So you don't know if you've moved yourself back an inch or you've left yourself forward an inch. It's really tricky. I used to play in tournaments years ago where when your hand touched the model, if your hand came off and you didn't move, that's the end of it. It's real tough conditions. Or as long as you had your hand on it, you could move it. But then what you then had is you had people doing, so they got their tape measure out. They go, I'm going to go 12 inches. And then they'll think about it. What about that? No, actually, no. I'll move myself back and then I'll go here. No, actually, I'll go that way. I'll go that way. And before you know it, this unit has just been hovering around a spot and could be 4 inches that way or 3 inches that way. It's just absolutely wild. And it's tough because I totally get it. You know, you're in the heat of battle. You're trying to win or take that objective, or you want to get your predator into combat or whatever, and your mind's elsewhere, and you say, I'll just move that here, and then you go away and do something else and think, well, actually, and you say to your opponent, do you mind if I just move that back? And you might have a really great opponent, and yeah, all right, fair enough, but it's hard then because a player will just go, I think it was about there. But what you really want them to do is, right, 12-inch move for Sakara, and all right, and then if, like me, sometimes you measure from the centre or the front, you think, well, did the player measure from the front of the tracks? Did he go from the centre? And it just feels a little bit tough. But it's hard, isn't it? Because, like I say, you're emotional, you're engaged in your game, and you're trying to do your best job. But it's tricky, so just bear that in mind. But the tape measure is a really, really key point because, you know, it makes all of a difference. Because at the end of the game, you can play your heart out, try to go for all the objectives, and then finally, when it comes to like a line breaker, you know, that model needs to be an inch over the line. But if you've robbed your opponent of 3 inches further on the game and he's 3 inches forward, then, you know, that dash for the line isn't so dramatic, is it? Because you've had 3 inches extra movement, and really you should be back. And in your player's eyes, if you roll your run move and you come an inch short, you don't make it, do you? But if you've robbed 3 inches from the previous turn or previous 2 turns or over 3 or 4 turns, you're going to make it over that line, which is worth 3, 5 or 7 points. So it's really tricky. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, it's really tough if you try and call your player out because you don't want to be a prick. But then at the same time, if your player is consciously cheating, then you've got to call them out. If they go, do you know what? Fair enough. You know, my car broke down on the way to the tournament, or, you know, my missus was giving me grief, or the dog got out, I had to catch the dog or whatever, and your mind might be elsewhere. That's fair enough. And if your player just politely says, hey, you know, can we just check the charge on that, or can we just check your movement on that, or what I tend to do sometimes, I go, how far can that unit move? I can't remember. So you're not being a prick about it. You're trying to be polite about it, and the player might go, oh yeah, they can only move. There's not much difference in movement in this game, of course. It's usually 6 or 12, isn't it? But sometimes it's a run move. You know, they've rolled a 4 and they've moved it 5. And, how far did that unit move? It was 4. Oh, yeah, I'm really sorry. You know, I'll just move it back an inch. And that can be a little bit of way around it. I think early on when I first started playing, I wouldn't say aggressive, but I was a little bit keen. I was like, hang on a minute. But you know, as you get a bit older and, you know, you play a few games, you know, toy soldiers isn't the most dramatic thing to happen in the world. But at the same time, you want a good, fair, balanced game. And there are ways of kind of approaching, you know, how far did that move? Or what's the weapon range on that? Or I can't remember. Do you measure from the front of the barrel or from the side or from the arm? Or do you measure from the front of the base or do you measure from, you know, it's just a nice, polite way of doing it. But also what it does is it makes sure that the atmosphere in the game's good and that everyone's abiding by the rules, because let's face it, the rule set is not perfect, and it's tough sometimes because you can get into a real deep situation like the one we just demonstrated here, and you just stand there and thinking, God, I have no idea how that works, or you know, the classic one is, you know, dreadnought weapons. What's the arc of a dreadnought? They can be quite tricky sometimes, or so you're trying to work out the arcs of vehicles and stuff, and you just forget. So anyway, like I said, I'm not trying to preach. I just want everyone to have a nice, good, fair game. And I do think the basic minimum requirement from any player is to do right by your opponent and make sure 6 inches is 6 inches, or it's a 12-inch charge or a 10-inch. You know, make sure your measuring's on, because that won't rob your opponent later on in the game when you're trying to go for a line breaker, or you're trying to get onto an objective, or, you know, you're trying to make that last desperate charge from your character into the enemy character for Slay the Warlord. Anyway, all right. I know these are short, and I would love to be filming battle reports right now, but we just can't do it. And believe me, it hurts me as much as it hurts you, because I've cancelled 30 games in the last few months, which is heartbreaking for me. And, you know, I've tried to book games in January, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen. So content, will just be me talking to camera, unfortunately. So if you have any ideas or any real tricky rules questions you'd like for me to talk about, please email me. It's david@the30kchannel.com. Please let me know if there's anything I can do. If not, I'm sure I can think of something. I'm going to continue on with the setting the scene and build some winter scenes. We're going to do Adeptus Titanicus next. Got a really good idea for that one. And then hopefully that'll carry us into the new year. With regards to a Christmas special, there isn't going to be a Christmas special, unfortunately. Usually it'd be a real big game or whatever. But what I might do is, if you remember a year ago, or maybe a bit longer than that, I did a channel survey, which I was going to do a video about that, but I just felt that a lot of the information was quite sensitive, and I just didn't quite want to give away all of those sort of questions and bits and bobs there. But there are some really, really great questions which you guys asked, which I would love to cover to try and help you understand a little bit more what happens behind the scenes, because I genuinely do think that a lot more goes on than people realise, and I'd love to kind of highlight those bits to you. But then also there were some really specific questions about X, Y, and Z, and I will try and address those if I can. So I'm quite looking forward to that, and I'll kind of discuss my plans for next year and the direction of the channel, which will be really interesting. There's lots to come. Finally, if you would like a free sticker, these have gone mad out the door. There's been tons sent. Please email me, david@the30kchannel.com. There is red, white, black, gold and silver stickers available. If you would like one, email me, tell me what you want, give me your address, and I will post them to you anywhere in the world. I've posted tons to Canada, tons to America. I've got a load going out to Australia to one person, and then they're going to distribute them to one of their club in Sydney somewhere. So that's really, really cool. So thank you for doing that. So if you want a sticker, just email me and I will post it to you. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this has been useful, and I'll see you in the next one.